They fired me on a Tuesday. No warning. No severance. Just a security escort, a cardboard box, and a humiliating walk through the glass-paneled office I'd helped build. I was a senior project lead at Verelix Capital, a boutique investment firm with a startup soul and a vulture's appetite. The kind of place where success was measured in Rolexes and regrets. I'd poured 5 years of my life into that company. Missed birthdays. Canceled vacations. Bled for deadlines that turned into million-dollar contracts. But when the Halicon Pharma deal collapsed, someone had to take the fall. And the CEO, Howard Black, chose me. "We regret this decision," he said, rehearsed and cold. "But the board is unanimous." He didn't even look me in the eye. What they didn't say, of course, was that Howard's own ego had tanked the deal. He'd pushed for an unrealistic close date, ignored due diligence red flags, and strong-armed the negotiation like a man who thought money could bend the truth. When the acquisition imploded, along with the $80 million bridge loan I'd begged them not to approve, they needed a scapegoat. I became the headline, "Lead strategist mishandles merger." My face made the internal memo. Not his. The real kicker? I'd warned them. Twice. But no one cares what a middleman says, not when there's a CEO to protect. Howard Black got a raise. I got blacklisted. I spent the next year couch surfing and consulting for people who couldn't afford to listen. I lost my apartment, my car, my health insurance. At one point, I was seriously considering applying for a job at a hardware store 2 towns over just for a paycheck and peace of mind. And through it all, I watched Verelix climb. They scrubbed my name from the site, but kept the structure I built. The models I wrote, the clients I brought in. And Howard Black. He stood on stages, gave interviews, praised his innovative team and fail-forward culture. He said things like, "Accountability is at the core of our leadership," while sipping $400 bourbon and shaking hands with men who called me a liability. I thought I'd let it go. Thought maybe eventually I could move on. Until the article. I was in a greasy diner with free Wi-Fi, nursing coffee I couldn't afford to refill when I saw the headline, "CEO's Sunland's Major Trust Fund Announces Investment Venture." There he was, a Landon Black. 22, smug as hell, flashing a watch worth more than my last year's salary. And in that moment, something clicked. It wasn't about the company anymore. It was about the man who ruined me. And the son he'd spent his life protecting. I didn't need to get even with Howard. I just needed to guide Landon exactly where he wanted to go, off a cliff. And this time, when the empire burned, everyone would know exactly who lit the match. Me. I wasn't some wide-eyed intern when I joined Verelix. I'd already been through the grinder, burned out at a mid-tier bank, rebuilt myself at a fintech startup, learned the hard way how sharks circle when there's blood in the water. So when I landed the project lead role, I treated it like a final shot at something real. And for a while, it was. Howard Black didn't start Verelix, he bought it. Turned a sleepy advisory firm into a boutique powerhouse with his name on every press release. He wasn't dumb, just dangerous. The kind of man who talked about calculated risk while flipping coins behind your back. He had a cult of personality, employees who worshipped him, investors who feared him, and a board that rubber-stamped every move. Still, I believed in the work. I stayed late, built risk models from scratch, cleaned up after junior analysts, gave the kind of presentations that made lazy partners look smart. And when the Halicon Pharma acquisition came along, I treated it like a career-defining moment. It was. Just not the way I hoped. The deal was bloated from the start. Overvaluation, legal landmines, regulatory gaps. I flagged every issue. I begged for more due diligence. But Howard wanted speed. He wanted headlines. "If it looks like a win, it is one," he said in the boardroom to applause. I knew then it was going to implode. And when it did, when the SEC stepped in, when Halicon's CFO resigned in disgrace, when our bridge financing went belly up, Howard held a closed-door meeting with the board. I wasn't invited. By Friday, I was terminated for cause. Mismanagement. Breach of oversight. They accused me of ignoring red flags I had literally put in writing. I could have fought back. I still had the emails, the slide decks, the timestamped Slack messages. But they had a wall of lawyers and PR reps. I had a futon and a few contacts too afraid to speak up. And so I vanished. I sold everything worth selling. Slept on friends' couches until I ran out of friends. Took gig work, financial copywriting, ghostwriting blog posts for crypto bros, tutoring spoiled kids in Excel formulas. Each job paid just enough to remind me how far I'd fallen. And every now and then, I saw Howard in the news, talking about resilience, about how the Halicon setback had made them more focused, never once admitting fault, never once looking back. He'd erased me, but I remembered everything, every late night, every sacrifice, every lie. So when I saw his son grinning in that article, talking about launching a next-gen investment fund with Daddy's backing, I didn't get angry. I got focused, because Landon Black had just become the single weakest point in his father's armor. A spoiled legacy with a pile of cash, no guidance, and a hunger to be bigger than Dad. And I was going to be his mentor, his idol, his downfall. Landon Black wasn't just rich, he was loud about it. His Instagram was a gallery of rented Lamborghinis, blurry nightclub photos, and cryptic captions like, "Trust fund?" More like "Trust me." He had over 200,000 followers and the emotional range of a scented candle. But what caught my attention wasn't the flash. It was the desperation. He wanted to be taken seriously, to be a mogul, not just Daddy's little investor. Every post screamed, "Look at me. I matter too." Perfect. I created a new persona, Mason Drake, boutique financial consultant, former hedge fund advisor, Silicon Valley adjacent. No real identity, but enough LinkedIn polish to pass. I crafted a website full of jargon and buzzwords, legacy risk mitigation, generational leverage scaling. It didn't need to make sense. It needed to sound expensive. Then I started reaching out. Not to Landon, but to his orbit, his inner circle of influencers, fake founders, and micro VCS who all wanted a piece of the next big thing. I offered advice for free, invited them to webinars, slid into DMs with lines like, "Saw your pitch deck, interesting model. Want to talk about scaling options?" It didn't take long for Landon to notice. His ego couldn't stand being the only one not in the loop. He reached out via his assistant, yes, he had one, asking if I'd be willing to consult on his fund's strategic structure. I pretended to hesitate, then agreed. Our first meeting was in a rooftop bar he reserved just for us. He wore sunglasses indoors and mispronounced arbitrage. "I don't want to be just another rich kid," he said, sipping tequila he couldn't pronounce either. "I want to build something that lasts." I nodded, all empathy. "Then let's make sure your foundation isn't built on sand." He was hooked. Over the next few weeks, I became his most trusted advisor. I didn't challenge him, I guided him, gently, made him feel brilliant when he parroted my ideas, let him think he was leading. We set up a holding company. I introduced him to shell entities and offshore accounts, all legal mostly. I showed him how to make risky plays look like strategic positioning. He called it next-level hustle. I called it laying groundwork. Meanwhile, I listened, took notes, learned everything, his passwords, his vices, his insecurities. He trusted me completely. And why wouldn't he? I was the only one who treated him like more than a meme with money. What Landon didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that every move I made was designed to isolate him, to cut the tethers connecting him to his father, to reason, to caution. Howard Black had built a firewall around his empire, but he'd never imagined his son would invite the arsonist through the front door. And now the fuse was lit. To Landon, I was Mason Drake, former Wall Street insider, private wealth whisperer, and unofficial genius behind 3 rising funds. In reality, Mason didn't exist beyond the surface. A carefully woven LinkedIn page, a burner phone, 2 fake diplomas from schools that sounded impressive but vague, and a fabricated trail of ghost clients with just enough NDAs to make fact-checking impossible. But the real magic wasn't the resume, it was the performance. Mason dressed sharp but not flashy, drove a Tesla but rented it monthly, quoted obscure economic theorists like he read them over breakfast, never bragged, just hinted, the kind of man who made other men lean in closer when he spoke, and made legacy kids like Landon desperate for validation. In the space of 2 months, I became his entire playbook. We met 3 times a week, sometimes in boardrooms, sometimes at poolside cabanas surrounded by models he barely remembered the names of. I coached him on pitches, helped him slide into startup rounds he had no business touching, and most importantly, I kept planting the same subtle, dangerous idea. Your father built his empire in a different world. You're building in the future. Landon loved that line. He repeated it to friends, journalists, investors. It became his brand. Landon 2.0, the disruptor, the rebel heir. I encouraged it with just enough skepticism to seem honest. You sure you want to take that public yet? I'd say, knowing he would. The more I fed his ambition, the more he distanced himself from his father. I nudged the wedge deeper whenever I could. One night, he called me drunk from a party. He thinks I'm still a kid, he slurred. Still calls it my allowance. I'm 23, bro. I'm running ing business. You're building something he doesn't understand, I said softly. That scares him. After that, Landon stopped CCING his father's assistant on emails. Step by step, I separated him from his lifelines. I became the only person he trusted financially, emotionally, eventually even socially. When one of his influencer buddies started questioning my credentials, Landon cut him off without blinking. He's just jealous, he told me. You're the only one who gets it. That was all I needed. I took control of his back-end finances, advised him to diversify into high-risk crypto startups that were more pyramid than portfolio. I helped him purchase 3 properties he couldn't maintain, encouraged him to front-load his fund's marketing to create buzz, knowing full well it would drain liquidity. I didn't need to con him. I just needed to give him permission to destroy himself. Because Landon Black wasn't just spoiled, he was combustible. All he needed was someone to strike the match. And Mason Drake was built to burn it all down. With Landon fully under my wing, the grooming moved into its next phase. Indulgence. I didn't tell him to blow through money. I made him feel like he was discovering how. I introduced him to high-stakes poker games under the guise of networking with alternative capital sources. Booked him VIP tables with industry influencers who promised clout but offered nothing of substance. I encouraged risk, calculated risk. I always called it. That made him feel smart. You've got a generational launch window, I told him one night at a penthouse party in Miami. Burning a little capital now to build buzz? That's strategy. He grinned, already drunk, signing off on a $30,000 bottle service tab like it was a parking ticket. His father would have been livid. That was the point. The more Landon flexed, the more disconnected he became from Howard's sphere of control. He stopped visiting the corporate office, fired his father's old accountant, created a new advisory board of models, influencers, and startup founders who knew more about social reach than earnings reports. I told him it was a new era of business transparency. He called it the Future Board. And just like that, Landon Black stopped being a rich kid with a fund and became a walking liability with a time bomb strapped to his ego. Perfect. But grooming isn't just about money. It's about isolation. I subtly encouraged the narrative that his family was holding him back, that they didn't believe in him, that he was the one building something real while they were too old to understand it. They're legacy thinkers, I said. You're rewriting the rules. He started showing up late to family events, then skipping them entirely. Eventually, he blocked his father on Instagram. You think he even notices? He asked. He will, I replied. When you're 10 times bigger. I built him up while hollowing him out. Told him the parties were good for visibility. That dating multiple models built mystique. That losing sleep meant he was hungry. That questioning himself was what failures did, not founders. And Landon? He believed every word. Because I never lied to him directly. I just gave him enough rope to tangle himself, and made sure he thought it was a crown. By month 4, he was hemorrhaging money, bragging about non-existent ROI, and planning a Dubai expansion. And through it all, I stood beside him. Supportive, sincere, smiling. Mason Drake, the mentor, the enabler, the ghost of every mistake he hadn't made yet. Soon, I wouldn't need to guide him anymore. He'd be running full speed into the dark, dragging the Black family name behind him. And when the world turned on him, so would his father, just as planned. If Phase 1 was about indulgence, Phase 2 was about erosion of judgment, of boundaries, of identity. I began introducing Landon to people who specialized in beautiful distractions. Nightclub promoters who knew his name before he walked in. Socialites who smiled too perfectly and never asked about his quarterly burn rate. Even a few party advisors. Ex-club kids turned pseudo-life coaches, who whispered affirmations between lines of designer coke. Landon soaked it up. Balance is for bankers, he told me one night, shirt half-buttoned, pupils saucer-wide. I'm building culture. You're building a legacy, I replied. Let them catch up. He laughed, stumbled into a VIP booth, and ordered 3 more bottles for a group of influencers he'd met 20 minutes earlier. He wasn't just partying anymore. He was transforming. I made sure the transformation was documented. I hired a ghost videographer, a guy I'd worked with during my consulting years, to film Landon at his worst. The footage looked like a Vice documentary about the downfall of an empire, shaky club shots, barely coherent interviews, moments of unfiltered arrogance caught on expensive lenses. All of it was saved, time-stamped, categorized. Landon never noticed. He was too busy disrupting traditional wealth paradigms, which apparently meant throwing pool parties that left his Beverly Hills rental looking like a college dorm after finals week. And the drugs? I never handed him any. That would have been too direct, too traceable. But I let them happen. Introduced the right people. Looked the other way when he disappeared into bathrooms with girls who had more filters than morals. Gave him enough cover to feel untouchable. And when he finally tried to confess, I made sure to reframe it. You're a visionary, I told him as he sat sweating in my office, twitching from too much Adderall and too little sleep. People like you don't play by rules, they write them. He nodded. Believed it. That night, he signed off on a 7-figure investment into a shell company I'd created months prior. Technically, it was legal. Operationally, it was dead before the wire transfer cleared. Another nail in the coffin. By now, his fund was a joke. On paper, it still held value. But the assets were toxic, the expenses unchecked, and his personal spending bled through every report like ink in water. His inner circle noticed. One by one, they began to pull away, spooked by rumors, screenshots, whispers I seeded in private DMs and back-channel emails. But Landon didn't see it. He was too high, too proud, too far gone. And as the walls began to close in, he didn't run. He bragged. This is what empires look like before they go global, he said. I just nodded. You're absolutely right. He was standing on the edge of the cliff now. All I had to do was let him fall. And make sure the cameras were rolling when he did. It started with a video. Not the worst one I had, not yet. Just a taste. A 10-second clip of Landon in a club slurring his way through a rant about peasant investors and how the market's for people too stupid to inherit power. No context. No setup. Just enough to be damaging if someone wanted it to be. I sent it anonymously to a small business gossip site known for chewing up tech bros and spitting them out in clickbait headlines. It went viral in 4 hours. Trust fund terror, Landon Black's private party rant exposes elitist attitude. Suddenly Landon wasn't a visionary. He was a joke. A meme. Every misstep, every fabricated win, every embarrassing live stream resurfaced. Journalists pounced. Twitter dragged him. TikTok stitched his worst moments into comedy gold. Then came the podcast appearance. It was meant to be a rebound, his PR team's attempt at salvaging the wreckage. I told him not to do it. He insisted. People need to hear from the real me, he said. They did. And it was worse than I could have hoped. He rambled. Blamed haters and old money gatekeepers. Claimed he was redefining ROI to include social capital. The host didn't even challenge him, just let the train wreck unfold in real time. The backlash was immediate. Sponsors dropped him. His fund's few legitimate investors threatened lawsuits. One filed already, citing fraudulent misrepresentation of fund stability. Meanwhile, I started releasing the documents. leaked a copy of his laughable Q2 report to a journalist I knew from my old life, someone who didn't owe me favors but liked a good scandal. I made sure she found the discrepancies, the conflicts of interest. The investor funds redirected to personal accounts under the guise of strategic branding initiatives. Then I fed the second video. This one showed Landon barely conscious at a penthouse party surrounded by half-naked strangers, one of whom had a needle in her hand. It wasn't just ugly. It was damning. Every parent on his investor list pulled out. The fund's website went down. His lawyer went silent. And Howard Black didn't say a word publicly. But I heard through channels he had flown to the city in secret. Tried to do damage control. Tried to find his son. Tried and failed. Landon had already vanished into a haze of pills, press, and paranoia. He called me once. "Mason, bro. I think someone's doing this. I think they're after me." I listened, then said what he needed to hear. "You're just too powerful now. They can't control you, so they're trying to destroy you." He thanked me, told me I was the only one he trusted. I muted the call, let him talk to an empty line for 6 more minutes. Then I hung up, because I was done talking. The empire had cracked. The black name was bleeding, and I was just one strike away from shattering it completely. The collapse of Landon's public image was a bombshell, but the implosion of Howard's business? That was the real detonation. Howard Black had spent 3 decades building his reputation as a visionary executive, calculating, disciplined, unshakable. But no brand, no matter how well polished, survives a scandal with your last name on every headline and your son's face in every tabloid. At first, Howard tried to control the narrative. He issued a statement distancing himself from Landon, calling his behavior a regrettable detour from the family's legacy of integrity. It might have worked if he hadn't signed off on that very legacy being Landon's financial launchpad. I made sure the paper trail was there. Emails, transaction records, wire transfers that originated from Black family trusts and corporate accounts. A smoking gun, a private memo showing Howard's signature approving early access to capital assets from a board that didn't officially exist. All of it packaged neatly and leaked anonymously to a major financial watchdog blog. Black money, how a corporate titan funded his son's empire of chaos. The fallout was swift. Stockholders at Howard's company demanded an emergency meeting. The board froze executive privileges. The SEC announced a preliminary inquiry. 3 longtime partners resigned publicly within 48 hours. His company's stock plummeted 22% in a week. But the worst was internal. I had a contact inside the firm, someone junior enough to be ignored, but sharp enough to feed me screenshots. According to the chatter, Howard lost his temper in a closed-door meeting. Screamed at his CFO. Accused people of betrayal. Threatened lawsuits. Then locked himself in his office and didn't come out for hours. By the time he emerged, the media was circling like vultures. He gave one press conference. "I will not allow personal matters to distract from our mission of excellence." But his voice cracked. I watched it live, savoring every blink, every pause where the words caught in his throat. He looked like a man trying to hold back an ocean with a coffee cup. And Landon? He was still missing. Rumors swirled, rehab, Switzerland, and off-the-grid yacht somewhere near the Greek Isles. His accounts had gone dark. His phone disconnected. Exactly as planned. The headlines now painted Howard not as a titan but a father who had lost control of his legacy. The empire was still standing, but barely, and everyone watching knew the collapse had begun from within. Investors pulled out. Clients paused contracts. No one wanted to be tied to a scandal where both the founder and heir were seen as toxic. And me? I sat quietly in my small, unremarkable condo. No press, no trail, no credit. Just a folder of timelines, receipts, and backups, proof of what I'd done. Of what he'd done. I wasn't finished yet. Because I hadn't touched the part that really hurt. Not yet. That came next. The media storm was waning, but the damage was irreversible. Howard Black's name had become synonymous with excess, nepotism, and failure, a trifecta of disgrace that no PR team could undo. Still, for a man like him, reputation was only half the war. Family was the other. And I was about to cut what little remained of it. Landon resurfaced quietly in a clinic outside Santa Barbara. Not a publicized rehab, too much scrutiny for that, but a private wellness center that called itself a restorative sanctuary for elite transitions. Translation: Rich People Detox. He'd been found incoherent at a roadside motel, barely responsive, covered in vomit and alone. A clerk recognized his face from the news and called for help. The paramedics revived him. The media buried the story, probably paid to. But I made sure Howard found out. I mailed him a photo. No return address. No note. Just an 8 by 10 print of Landon on a gurney, eyes rolled back, pupils blown. Taken by someone I knew inside the EMT service. Not illegal. Just shared. Howard's wife, Celeste, had already retreated. Word was she moved into their Napa property after the second wave of scandal hit. She never liked the business world, only tolerated it. Landon's collapse pushed her past the edge. When the photo reached her hands, because it always would, I knew what it meant. The last pillar in Howard's life would crumble from within. Celeste filed for legal separation 3 weeks later. Quietly. Strategically. But the timing was unmistakable. The tabloids caught wind eventually. Black empire fractures amid family turmoil. And for once, Howard didn't release a statement. He didn't appear at shareholder calls. He didn't deny or distract. He disappeared. Rumors said he'd gone abroad, somewhere quiet, private. One executive claimed he'd seen Howard in a Tuscan villa staring blankly at vineyard rows while ignoring his phone. I believed it. Because when you've lost your son to scandal, your company to corruption, and your wife to disgust, all that's left is the mirror. And that's the one thing Howard Black couldn't spin. I didn't celebrate. There was no toast. No confetti. Just a deep, settling satisfaction, the kind that comes not from vengeance, but from equilibrium. The world hadn't burned. It had simply corrected itself. He had taken everything from me. And I had returned the favor. With precision. Landon's empire was gone. The Black name was a scar. And I was a ghost in every corner of their collapse. Still unseen. Still untouched. But finally finished. There was only one step left. Let go. And disappear for good. Vengeance, despite what the movies tell you, doesn't come with a crescendo. There's no orchestral swell, no slow-motion shot of your enemy collapsing at your feet. Real revenge is quiet. It's a storm that ends with silence and then nothing. And that's exactly what I wanted. I watched Howard Black vanish into disgrace. Watched his empire fracture, his allies flee, his family abandon him one by one. Landon was still alive, technically. He'd been spotted a few times after rehab, hollow-eyed, clinging to the fringes of LA's washed-out party scene. Word was he'd started a podcast. Lasted 3 episodes. I didn't listen. I didn't care. Because the mission was complete. Not just their financial collapse. Not just the public humiliation. But the internal rot. The loneliness. The gnawing self-loathing I had lived with for years now passed like a curse to the men who'd handed it to me. My name had never surfaced. Mason Drake disappeared as quickly as he'd arrived. The LinkedIn, the website, the burner phone, all wiped, shredded, gone. I reverted to my legal name, but not in any place that mattered. Not where anyone would ask questions. I moved inland. Small town. Rented a house near a lake. Bought a used truck and kept my phone off most of the time. No flashy job, no new hustle. I tutored math at a local learning center. Nobody knew I'd once orchestrated the slow, deliberate unraveling of a corporate dynasty. They just knew me as the guy who was patient, kind, quiet. I kept one thing from my past, a small black notebook. Inside it were names, dates, timelines. The blueprint of destruction. I read it once a year, not for nostalgia, but to remind myself what clarity looks like when it's forged in fire. People always say revenge doesn't heal you. They're wrong. It doesn't fix the past, no. It doesn't undo the nights I spent broken, wondering if the system would ever care about the truth. But it does something better. It closes the loop. It lets you walk away without the weight of injustice on your shoulders. Howard Black took everything from me because he thought people were tools. Because he thought power meant never answering for what you destroy. Now he lives in exile. Alone. With nothing but mirrors. And his son, the so-called heir, is a punchline with a trust fund he can't access and a reputation worth less than dust. The world moved on. So did I. Not out of mercy. Out of peace. Because when you've burned the kingdom and salted the earth beneath it, the only thing left to do is rest. Thanks for watching. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what you want to see next. See you in the next one.